They left no bones, no blood, no battle, just footprints leading into the waves. Centuries ago, along a desolate stretch of coastline where cliffs bleed into the North Atlantic, entire villages vanished. No signs of war, no graves, no wreckage, just tools dropped mid-task, meals half-eaten, fires still burning, and perfectly preserved trails of human footprints that led straight into the sea. Fishermen spoke of strange lights above the surf. Monks whispered of divine punishment. Some swore the tide sang to them, calling them home. And the strangest thing? It happened more than once. Across ancient Britain, Ireland, the Faroe Islands, even the Norwegian coast, entire communities disappeared without a trace, as if swallowed by the sea itself. Not by storm, not by conquest, by choice. Was it mass suicide? A forgotten ritual? Or something darker? Something we were never meant to remember? In this episode, we dive into the chilling legends, archaeological enigmas, and suppressed oral histories of coastal Europe's most haunting mystery. The people who walked willingly into the ocean and never returned. What called to them from beneath the waves? And why did they listen? It begins with footprints. Not just any footprints, but thousands of them. Preserved in silt, fossilized in peat, locked beneath layers of time. Human feet, child-sized and adult, barefoot and bound in primitive sandals. All of them facing one direction, toward the sea. In 1996, on a bleak stretch of British coast known as Formby Beach, archaeologists uncovered a footprint trail that shocked even the most seasoned researchers. The impressions stretched across tidal mudflats, remarkably preserved despite being over 5,000 years old. But it wasn't their age that was unsettling, it was their intent. The tracks didn't wander. They didn't turn back. They didn't end in play or labor. They went forward, steadily, deliberately, straight into the ocean. And then they stopped. No signs of drowning. No returning prints. No evidence of struggle, boats, or bodies. Just a human procession, frozen mid-journey, into the water's edge. Like a community had gathered, made a collective decision, and walked into oblivion. This wasn't a one-time anomaly. Similar trackways have been found across the British Isles, in Wales, in Norfolk, even in Orkney. Each shares the same eerie pattern, a group of people walking into the sea. Some appear to be families. Some, ritual groups. Some even include dogs and livestock. The sheer number of incidents shattered the theory of random erosion. This was no accident. It was intentional. But what intention could possibly lie behind such an act? On the western coast of Ireland, near the ancient monastic site of Skellig Michael, 8th century records tell of an entire fishing settlement that vanished in a single night. The monks who chronicled the event wrote that the villagers entered the great salt womb, bearing no fear, as though summoned by voices we could not hear. They left behind their homes, their livestock, and all their worldly possessions. Their small chapel, half carved into a sea cliff, was still lit with candles. The bodies were never found. Only their footprints remained, leading from the chapel to the rocks, down to the surf, and then nothing. That disappearance was dismissed by later historians as folklore. A metaphor, perhaps, for a community that migrated inland or was lost to a storm. But the footprints never made sense. Nor did the identical pattern of disappearances across the region. In 1934, during a coastal excavation in northern Scotland, researchers unearthed a perfectly preserved trail beneath a collapsed dune system. The peat revealed human tracks in double file, one adult, one child, marching out toward the sea. The last step was etched right at the edge of an ancient tide line. No boats, no animal remains, no settlement, no return. The mystery only deepened when these incidents were mapped chronologically. They spanned thousands of years, yet they echoed the same ritualistic behavior. It wasn't a single culture, or even a single religion. It was something older, something primal. There is no written account, no runes or stone carvings to explain what these people believed they were walking toward. But in the oral traditions of Celtic, Norse, and Basque coastal peoples, whispers persist of those who returned to the Mother Sea. A phrase with no clear doctrine, but overwhelming spiritual weight. A recurring legend tells of the Sea Bride, a deity or entity that would call the chosen ones to join her beneath the waves. In some stories, she's a siren. In others, a goddess of rebirth. Always, her voice comes in dreams, or through the crashing of waves. Always, the people follow. One Gaelic song, recorded in the 1600s and sung in hushed tones even today, speaks of those whose hearts turn to salt slash and feet to foam. It's a lament, a warning, and possibly a record of mass sacrifice. Skeptics argue this is coincidence, erosion, misinterpretation, faulty dating. But the geological layers don't lie. These tracks were made with purpose, and always toward the same end, the ocean. Some scientists theorize these were desperate migrations, fleeing famine or war, hoping to sail to unseen lands. But there are no launch points, no remnants of canoes, no harbors or river mouths nearby. Others claim these were acts of suicide, that small communities, starving, infected, outcast, chose death in the waves rather than slow suffering. But suicide, especially ritual group suicide, leaves signs, symbols, remains. These sites leave nothing but silence. The eeriest element is how untouched the settlements were. Meals left half prepared, tools resting where they were last used, as if the people stopped everything and left in the middle of life. It wasn't chaos. It was devotion. In 2011, a series of storms on the Welsh coast unearthed a petrified forest long buried beneath the dunes of Borth Beach. Among the twisted tree roots were more footprints, adults and children again, leading to the sea. When carbon dated, the impressions were found to be over 4,000 years old. And again, no signs of boats or return. Local legends refer to this place as Cantorar Gwaelod, the Sunken Hundred, a lost kingdom swallowed by the sea after its people became too prideful. Most historians wrote this off as myth. But what if the story had it backwards? What if the kingdom wasn't swallowed? What if it walked willingly into the sea? As these ancient cases accumulated, historians began to notice a strange pattern. The disappearances almost always occurred during specific lunar cycles, especially during spring tides and eclipses. Some were tied to solstices, others to equinoxes. The correlation was undeniable, which begged the question, were these acts of astronomy, of worship, or of something even older than civilization, something passed down through blood and bone? In the early 2000s, geneticists studying mitochondrial DNA across remote coastal populations found curious anomalies, shared markers that suggested repeated founder effects. Isolated communities, appearing suddenly on coastlines, genetically unrelated to inland neighbors. And then, just as suddenly gone. Like a ghost population, always arriving, always vanishing, always drawn to the water. The phenomenon has no name. It's not taught in schools, not recognized as a unified event. And yet, the evidence is spread across millennia, whispered in lullabies, etched in crumbling monastic records, and buried in peat. A scattered people, who seemed to hear something the rest of us could not. A call from the sea. Not metaphor. Not madness. Invitation. They did not vanish. They answered. Before Christianity took hold of Europe's shores, the sea was not seen as a divider, but as a living god. From the Atlantic fringe of Ireland to the volcanic cliffs of the Faroe Islands and the storm-lashed coasts of Scandinavia, ancient peoples shared a strange and sobering reverence for the ocean. It was mother, destroyer, womb, and tomb. It gave fish, but also demanded tribute. It delivered trade, but also took sons and ships in silence. And buried deep within their myths and oral traditions is a figure, sometimes feminine, sometimes faceless, who lives beneath the waves. A creature not of flesh, but of voice. She doesn't attack. She calls. In Gaelic tales, she is known as Muirnin, the sea beloved. Norse legends speak of Ran, the net weaver, whose drowned hulls glitter with the gold of lost sailors. In Breton myth, she becomes Yanan Odi, the singing tide who lures the sorrowful into the surf. And in the Sami shamanic traditions of the far north, there are the Njav, spirits of salt water who guide, or claim, the living. Different names. Same function. They don't seduce. They summon. And what's chilling is this. The ones who follow don't fight. They go willingly. One of the most persistent motifs across Celtic legend is the idea of the sea return, that the ocean is not a place of death, but of homecoming. It's where the first humans came from, where their ancestors sleep, and where the faithful will one day return. In the 9th century Irish text Leber Gabala Aran, the Book of Invasions, The final migration of divine beings, the Tuatha De Danann, ends not with conquest or death, but with disappearance. They turned to the sea, the text says, and were seen no more. But their songs are still heard in the foam. Were these just poetic flourishes? Or were they references to real events? Generations of people vanishing into the water willingly? The Norse sagas offer something eerier. The Eyrbyggja saga, set in 10th century Iceland, recounts how a strange cult settled a coastal village, only to vanish during a solar eclipse. The only clues were ceremonial stones pointing toward the bay and carvings that read, "The sea does not forget its children." The saga was long dismissed as folklore. But in the 1970s, archaeologists did indeed discover a stone circle matching the description, alongside remains of dwellings abandoned mid-construction. Once again, no bones. No signs of flight or attack. Just a calm, methodical disappearance. Into the tide. These were not isolated myths. In coastal Brittany, France, stories abound of the Corrigans, not mischievous elves, but mournful seawalkers. Pale, silent figures seen at dusk, walking into the surf with arms raised. They never return. In some tales, they're spirits. In others, living people who choose the ocean over the land. The locals say they're the last of a lost race. In Basque country, the Itzaslamanak, sea walkers, are said to be drawn to certain shores during high tide. Children are warned never to follow them. But those who do are never seen again. And in the Faroes, where wind and wave dictate every breath of life, there are whisperings of the Sjófolk, sea people who are not mermaids or monsters, but ordinary folk who disappear on calm days, sometimes in full view of others, as if stepping through an invisible door in the water. All across these coasts, the sea is more than a force. It is a presence, ancient, aware. These stories might be dismissed as symbolic, fables to explain drowning, migration, or mental illness. But they persist with remarkable consistency across languages, cultures, and even pre-Christian eras. Always with the same structure. A group hears the call. They walk into the sea. They do not resist. They are never seen again. And always, the ones left behind describe the same final image, serenity. Not panic, not fear, just a strange peace in those who walked away. Why would entire communities embrace death so willingly? One theory comes from the early Neolithic concept of water as passage, the belief that water was the threshold between worlds. Just as the womb is a water-filled space, so too was the afterlife believed to be accessed through water. In some ancient Indo-European mythologies, rivers, lakes, and oceans were literal gateways to the world of the gods. The sea wasn't death. It was return. But what if these stories weren't just metaphor? In 2008, off the coast of Doggerland, the submerged landmass that once connected Britain to continental Europe, divers exploring a submerged ridge came across something unexpected: standing stones, arranged in a rough circle, beneath over 100 feet of seawater. Nearby, sonar scans revealed straight-line formations, likely post holes or long-forgotten causeways. And buried beneath the sediment, evidence of fire pits, animal bones, and tools. In other words, a gathering site. What's chilling is the dating. Over 8,000 years old. Right around the time sea levels were rising rapidly due to post-ice age melt. It's entirely plausible that a large community once lived here and watched as the ocean reclaimed the land. But instead of fleeing, what if some stayed? What if they chose to go under? Anthropologists have noted another disturbing pattern. In many of these coastal cultures, there are taboos around retrieving the bodies of those lost to the sea. In some areas, it was considered sacrilege to bury a drowned body on land. Others insisted that if someone answered the sea, they could never be brought back. Even more disturbing, in some traditions, families of those who disappeared were expected to celebrate the event, not mourn, because it was seen not as tragedy, but ascension. To the outside world, it looks like mass death. But to the people within these traditions, it may have been salvation. And then there are the voices. Scattered through historical accounts are references to ocean music or phantom calls heard near disappearances. In 1721, a Scottish sailor named Angus MacFay recorded in his journal that his crewmates heard a singing in the tide, sweet, distant, and like a mother to her child. Days later, 2 of his crew vanished during shore leave. In 1903, A Faroese priest recorded villagers claiming to hear names spoken in the surf before the death of a fisherman. The priest dismissed it as superstition until he heard the voice himself. He documented it in his final sermon before disappearing during a solo walk on the rocks. And in 1987, a group of amateur radio enthusiasts in County Clare picked up strange interference during a coastal storm, low-frequency vocalizations resembling human chant that seemed to modulate with the waves. The recordings were lost in a fire, but two members later swore the patterns were not random. They were harmonic, structured, intentional, almost like a signal, almost like a song. So what are we looking at? Mass hallucination? Cultural psychosis? A forgotten religious rite? Or could something else, older, deeper, be involved? Something that exists in the place where history ends and mythology begins. Because when you peel back the stories, when you trace the carvings and follow the footprints, one message echoes over and over, no matter the culture or the century. The sea remembers its own, and it calls them back. If it were merely folklore, if these were just stories, we'd expect them to fade under the weight of history. But instead, they intensify, sharpen, become more disturbing the deeper you dig. Because buried beneath the myths and maritime mysteries lies something even darker, fragments of a belief system. One not bound to a specific religion, but ancient enough to predate them all. A doctrine of sacrifice, carved in salt, blood, and silence. They called themselves children of the brine, or the pale kin, or, simply, those who heard. Rare phrases, scattered, purged from written record, but they appear, barely, like barnacles on the hull of European religious history, in early medieval manuscripts, in heretical trials, in secret church decrees, and always in fear. In 1184, during the Synod of Verona, Pope Lucius III issued a decree against those who dwell beside the tides and keep the old songs. The edict lumped them in with Cathars and Waldensians, declaring them heretici marini, marine heretics. They were accused not of devil worship, but of something stranger. They offer no prayer to God, but to the waters. They do not bury their dead, but send them westward with no vessel. And they mark their infants with salt on the tongue, as if binding them to silence. This wasn't the only record. A century later, in 1290, a Franciscan missionary in the Orkneys reported the discovery of a strange stone altar near the cliffs of Yesnaby. It bore no cross, only concentric circles and the depiction of a woman with tendrils of kelp for hair. The villagers, when questioned, claimed ignorance, but one elderly woman admitted her grandmother once told tales of the sea bride and the promise of the salt. That missionary was later found dead, face down in the surf, mouth filled with sand. The church quietly labeled the region spiritually contaminated. What exactly was this doctrine? What were its teachings? There is no single surviving text, no scripture, only whispers, but pieced together from trial records, suppressed manuscripts, and apocryphal gospels, a chilling pattern emerges. Salt is sacred, not as seasoning, but as a living symbol of the ocean's covenant. Children were fed salt at birth, not for flavor, but as a seal. Speech is forbidden. Many sects believed the sea could only be heard by the silent, that speaking too much corrupted the inner tide. Some groups practiced lifelong muteness as a spiritual vow. The body is not yours. Upon death, you must return to the source, meaning the sea. Burial on land was considered theft. The sea is the first mother. Not God, not earth. The sea. All life comes from her, and she demands return. When she calls, you go. No questions, no delays. Whether the call came in dreams, in omens, or in voices on the wind, those who heard were expected to obey. The doctrine was simple, terrifyingly simple, and it wasn't symbolic. In 1457, during a little-known inquisition in the Breton port of Douarnenez, 3 women were tried for encouraging their kin to walk into the sea. Under torture, one confessed that it was her daughter's time, and that she had only readied her with the ritual salts and kelp binding, as was tradition. She claimed her daughter had been called by name in the tide, and that not answering would mean worse than death. Before sentence could be passed, all 3 women vanished from their cells. The guards reported a strange sound during the night, like rushing water through the stone corridors, though no storm had passed. Their manacles were found open, wet. The inquisitor who led the trial resigned within the week and entered a monastery. He never spoke again. Why would entire groups of people willingly embrace such a doctrine? What could drive them to ritual drowning, or worse, to send their children to it? Anthropologists point to the principle of ecstatic death, the belief that death, under certain conditions, is not an end but a transcendence. In ancient Egypt, India, and Mesoamerica, there were accepted ways to die that were seen not as defeat, but elevation. Sacrifice was an act of intimacy with the divine. The sea doctrine follows that logic, but takes it further. Because it does not require death by execution or offering. It demands surrender. You must walk willingly. The ultimate submission of ego, of fear, of will. The belief was, you do not drown. You ascend, or return, or merge. In the early 1500s, a Jesuit missionary in the Hebrides described a coastal sect who worshipped no idols but made regular processions to the foam. Entire villages, barefoot, robed in gray, would line up in silence, faces painted with ashes. Sometimes they would sing in tones the missionary called unearthly. At the end of each procession, one or more would step into the surf and keep walking until they vanished beneath the waves. No one wept. No one intervened. It was understood. The missionaries' writings were confiscated and buried in the Vatican's Archivum Secretum. Only fragments survive in marginalia. You might ask, why were these groups so difficult to suppress? The answer is unsettling. They didn't resist. There are no records of revolt, no martyrs, no sect wars, only whispers and disappearances. They moved like ghosts, worshipped in silence, blended in until the moment came. And when the call came, they obeyed. Imagine living next to one, a neighbor, a friend, a spouse, and one morning, they're gone, and their footprints lead to the sea, and no one talks about it, because it's not a tragedy, it's doctrine. Perhaps the most chilling account comes from a 17th-century Dutch merchant named Willem Graaf, who traded along the Scottish coast. In a letter to his brother, he described wintering near a remote fishing hamlet in Caithness. The people were kind but strange. They sang little and always watched the sea. On the third month, one morning I woke to find their houses empty. No signs of struggle. Doors open. Fish still in nets. I followed tracks in the snow to the shore. Over 100 footprints. Men, women, even babes. All leading into the gray surf. And then, nothing. The waves were calm. The air still. But I swear I heard laughter on the wind. And a voice, just once, that spoke my name. He never returned to Scotland. What does all this mean? A cult that spanned centuries, hidden in plain sight? A pre-religious faith that survived purges, persecution, and cultural genocide, because its greatest act was disappearance? Or is there something even more terrifying? What if the doctrine wasn't entirely human? What if the origin of this belief, this surrender, came not from within our minds, but from something else? Something in the deep. Something older than language. That didn't just inspire worship, but commanded it. Because whether you believe the stories or not, one thing is clear. They weren't afraid. They were ready. And they believed the sea would take them home. There are places on this earth where the land holds its breath, where the rocks seem to whisper, where the tides speak a language older than words, and where structures, massive, deliberate, and inexplicable, wait silently beneath the surf. They're not just ruins. They're relics of something we were never meant to remember. Because across the coastal edges of Europe, along the British Isles, in the Basque Country, in remote Nordic inlets, are ruins swallowed by the sea. Cities that never appear in recorded history. Stone circles, roads, and altars found beneath the waves. Entire settlements, perfectly aligned with celestial events, lost to rising waters not once, but repeatedly. Their locations follow no logic. Their designs defy tribal architecture. And most disturbingly, many are built with a singular orientation, facing the ocean, waiting. In 1931, a fishing trawler in the North Sea snagged something unexpected in its nets, a worked antler tool and several large bones. When scientists examined the haul, they made a staggering realization. It had come from a submerged region known as Dogger Bank, once part of an ancient landmass now called Doggerland. Doggerland was real. A vast stretch of land that connected Britain to mainland Europe during the Mesolithic period, until it was swallowed by rising seas around 6000 BCE. But it wasn't just wilderness. Sonar scans revealed evidence of habitation, straight-line formations, circular structures, hearth sites, even burial mounds. And in some areas, megalithic patterns, arranged stones pointing directly toward submerged canyons, as if marking something deep beneath the seabed. There was no sign of evacuation, no signs of mass death, just abandonment. Not haphazard, not sudden, but almost ceremonial, as if they knew the sea was coming and welcomed it. Further south, off the coast of western France, lies the Bay of Quiberon, a quiet inlet lined with fishing villages and overlooked by most tourists. But beneath its shallow waters lies one of the most perplexing underwater ruins in Europe, the Karnak stones of Kurlas. Only visible during extreme low tides, these partially submerged standing stones mirror the famous Karnak alignments inland. Except these face the water. They stretch in near-perfect lines toward the Atlantic, as if forming a pathway. Some researchers believe they may be older than the pyramids. Local legends say the stones were people, frozen in time for defying the sea's will. Others say they were guides, leading the faithful into the depths. No human remains have ever been found at the site, but divers report a peculiar sensation while swimming there, an overwhelming sense of being watched. In the Faroes, archaeologists uncovered a network of sea-facing terraces, painstakingly carved into cliffs. The stones bore no writing, only grooves that channeled rainwater into the ocean. Their purpose remains unknown, but their alignment, perfectly synchronized with the summer solstice, suggests a ritual significance. And nearby, a long, narrow path carved directly into the rock, descending into the sea. No handrails, no signs of docks, just steps, worn smooth with use, ending in nothing, except, perhaps, the beginning of something else. These submerged structures aren't just architectural mysteries. They map out an ideology, a worldview that placed the sea at the center of existence. In modern archaeology, this idea remains taboo. Civilizations are assumed to expand away from water, to seek safety, elevation, and permanence. But these structures suggest the opposite. They were built for the ocean, and many were designed to be submerged. Why? To modern logic, it makes no sense. But to those who worshipped the sea, not as a threat, but as destiny, it was holy. Sacred architecture wasn't meant to last forever above ground. It was meant to sink, to return. Like them, these were not ruins. They were offerings, stone prayers cast into the deep. And then there are the artifacts. In 2002, researchers exploring the Orkney Islands discovered a set of carved stones buried beneath a sea cave. Each bore a strange spiral symbol, unlike anything in local iconography. When exposed to moisture, the stones emitted a faint smell of brine, not from the surrounding sea, but from deep within the rock itself. Tests revealed that the stones contained marine salt concentrations far higher than could occur naturally, as if they had been soaked in ocean water for centuries, then buried before the cave existed. How do you bury something in a cave that hadn't yet formed? Unless you knew the land would fall. Unless the cave was part of the plan. Even more disturbing is how these sites repeat across disparate cultures, with eerie consistency. In Western Ireland, the lost village of Tra Farin, the Strand of Truth, is said to emerge from the sea once every 7 years. Locals say it was a village of walkers who entered the ocean during a lunar eclipse. In the Lofoten archipelago of Norway, fishermen avoid certain fjords said to be cursed by the tide-born, those who walked into the sea and built invisible cities beneath the waves. Sometimes, during storms, lights are seen flickering beneath the surface. Some believe they are still there, building, worshipping, waiting. Even in the Basque Country, researchers have recorded over a dozen submerged step pyramids, each one with a single corridor descending into deep trenches. Not one contains human bones, only altars, often layered in shells. What kind of culture builds temples no one can visit? Unless they knew one day they'd need to return. What if these ruins weren't just remnants? What if they were invitations? A message, written in architecture and stone, meant not for us, but for something watching from below. Because here is the truth that most archaeologists avoid. There is no inland version of these structures. No equivalent temples in forests or mountains. They exist only by the sea. And that suggests a worldview centered not on land, but on return. Not heaven, not underworld, but ocean. In 2016, a French diver exploring a submerged ruin off the coast of Brittany reported finding a chamber. Inside were rows of stone seats, each precisely shaped, each facing an altar carved with concentric rings. He described a feeling of pressure in the chamber, not physical, but emotional, as if something was waiting to be acknowledged. His camera flooded before surfacing. No footage survived. But before abandoning the dive, he recovered a single item, a smooth, black stone, etched with wave-like grooves. Carbon dating was impossible. The stone contained no organic material, but its shape matched others found in Hebrides, Orkney, and Doggerland. It was part of a pattern, a message, maybe, or a key. We think of civilization as building upward, pyramids, towers, cathedrals, always reaching toward the sky. But what if some cultures look the other way? What if their gods didn't live above, but below? What if they weren't trying to escape the flood, but join it? Because if the tide is a god, then drowning isn't death. It's communion. And the structures left behind aren't ruins. They're waiting rooms. And somewhere, beneath the shifting sands, beneath the hush of the waves and the silence of forgotten centuries, something ancient is still listening, waiting for the next return. It's one thing to imagine a slow erosion of belief, a gentle myth, decaying over centuries. But what if it never stopped? What if the sea didn't just whisper to ancient peoples, but kept calling? Again and again, even into the modern age. Because buried in the margins of official history, in ship logs, town records, and faded newspaper clippings, are the chilling echoes of a ritual we thought long extinct. Not legend, not metaphor, but real, documented disappearances. Groups, villages, communities, who stood up, faced the waves, and walked into them. One of the most disturbing cases emerged from the Faroe Islands in 1812. On the tiny island of Mykines, known for its isolation and violent winds, a Danish surveyor named Erik Nordahl was sent to update shipping maps. What he found instead was silence. The village was empty. Livestock wandered untethered. Fires still smoldered in hearths. Food lay half-prepared on tables. But there were no people, none. Not in the fields, not in the houses, not hiding. And then he saw the footprints. Nordahl followed them to the western cliffs, dozens of prints, preserved in mud, all leading in the same direction. Some were small, likely children. Others barefoot, others booted. But all walked single file toward the sea. None turned back. None veered off. And at the edge of the cliff, nothing. No blood. No signs of violence. Just the wind, the surf, and a chill that Nordahl would write about until his death. He recorded the event in a letter to Copenhagen. They went together, in peace. It was not panic. It was something else, like they knew the tide had finally come to claim them. The incident was buried in Danish archives for decades. You might dismiss this as isolated, a freak event, mass hysteria, but it wasn't the only one. In 1904, in the fishing town of Aberfraw, Wales, local records describe an unholy silence that fell over the village during the spring equinox. A reverend visiting from Bangor reported that 19 residents had vanished overnight. No signs of storm, no struggle, only a line of seaweed-bound talismans found on their doorsteps. 3 days later, a fisherman reported seeing figures, gray-robed, standing waist-deep in the surf, arms raised to the sky. When he called out, they didn't turn. They simply walked deeper and disappeared beneath the waves. Police dismissed the claim, but the talismans, woven in a spiral pattern found in Neolithic graves, were real. Some were preserved in a local museum until a fire destroyed the entire display in 1931. No arsonist was found. The fire began in the water damage archives. Then there's the case of St. Ethelred's Island, a monastic settlement in northern England. Founded in the 7th century, the island had long been considered cursed, not because of war or disease, but because its final monks simply vanished. Not fled, not massacred, vanished. In 1523, a visiting bishop arrived to find the abbey intact, candles still burning, but every monk gone. Robes folded on their beds, doors unlocked. Even the livestock still fed. The bishop followed a carved stone path that led down to a sea cave at low tide. Inside, He found the floor covered in ashes and concentric circles drawn in fish bones. A single message was carved above the entrance, in Latin, ipsa vocavit numbers. She called us. And the pattern doesn't end there. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, ships regularly reported sightings of sea walkers, not spectral apparitions, but physical people. In the Shetland Islands, logs mention pale groups walking shoulder-deep in water, seemingly unaffected by cold or current. In 1847, the HMS Dauntless recorded the encounter of what the crew believed was a group of stranded villagers. They approached in rowboats, only to find the figures knee-deep in water, motionless, gazing out to sea. When hailed, they did not move. When the boats neared, the figures simply turned and walked forward, into the deep, disappearing within seconds. The crew searched the coast for survivors. None were ever found. The 20th century brought modernity and denial. But even then, the pattern refused to vanish. In 1928, on the island of Barra in the Outer Hebrides, a teacher reported several of his students exhibiting obsessive salt behavior, licking rocks, staring at the tide for hours, humming tunelessly during lessons. One night, 5 of them failed to return home. Their shoes were later found arranged in a spiral on the shore. One contained a folded piece of parchment. On it, scrawled in what looked like seaweed ink, were the words, "She is beneath. She is singing." Their bodies were never recovered. The incident was quietly attributed to coastal trauma, a term invented that same year by the Department of Health. Even today, stories persist, on forums, in police records, on backwater message boards. A Reddit user in 2017 described a visit to the Scottish Highlands. While hiking along a beach, he saw a man standing knee-deep in the surf, eyes closed, humming softly. Thinking the man was in trouble, he approached, but the man calmly looked at him and whispered, "You don't hear it, do you?" He then turned and walked into the waves. Police found no body. The man had left his clothes and wallet on a nearby boulder. Inside the wallet, a note reading, "She's calling." The thread was deleted days later. The user's account vanished. Why these disappearances are so persistently ignored is its own mystery. Perhaps because they don't make sense. They don't conform to theories of mental illness, cult behavior, or rational suicide. There's no ideology, no manifesto, no leader, no social network. Just an internal moment, a personal reckoning, and a decision to walk, alone, or together, into the sea, not because of despair, but because of belief. Psychologists have speculated that collective salt death may be an extreme form of religious delusion. That, perhaps, some genetic or neurological pattern in coastal populations made them more susceptible to aquatic psychosis. But this doesn't explain the uniformity across centuries, cultures, and continents, nor the striking consistency in symbols, spiral paths, and the phrase, "She is calling." Who is she? A goddess? A hallucination? A buried memory from some ancestral trauma? Or something else entirely? Something ancient, patient, and powerful enough to wait centuries for the next procession. You might be thinking, if this were real, there'd be more evidence. More missing persons reports. More records. But think about it. If you lived in a coastal village, and someone you loved stood up one morning and walked into the tide, eyes shining with peace, would you call the police? Or would you follow? Because that's the horror. It doesn't happen with violence. It doesn't happen with coercion. It happens with willingness. Not a march of madness, but of faith. A soft, salt-laced surrender. The final procession. The death march. To nowhere. It begins as a hum. Too low to be language. Too deep to be wind. Fishermen in Orkney say it rises just before the tide changes. Divers in Nova Scotia say it echoes in caves too deep for sonar. And those who've heard it, truly heard it, describe it not as sound, but as memory. Something they were born knowing. Something that waits beneath their waking mind, like a song half remembered from childhood. This is the final layer. Not the rituals, not the footprints, not even the disappearances, but the call. The inexplicable acoustic phenomenon that threads through centuries of disappearances. The same frequency, the same rhythm, found in shipwreck logs, drowned monastery records, classified military hydrophone data. It is real, and it is still being heard. In 1997, NOAA hydrophones detected something strange in the South Pacific. A bloop, ultra-low frequency, non-mechanical, and far too loud to be natural. It was eventually dubbed the upsweep, then Julia, then the slowdown. Different events, different regions, all with one thing in common. The sound had intent. It would pause, shift, echo off seamounts, as if it were navigating. Some scientists suggested tectonic shifts, others, submarine activity. But none could explain why the sound resembled human speech slowed 400 times, or why it mirrored wave patterns found in pre-Columbian shell trumpets discovered in Peru, dating back over 2,000 years. Sound, somehow, embedded in ritual. In 2011, a retired sonar technician from the Royal Navy, who asked not to be named, came forward with a disturbing account. In 1983, while stationed near the Faroe-Shetland Channel, he and his crew detected an unknown submerged object, moving in slow spirals beneath their vessel. They attempted to ping it. It responded, not with echo, but with mimicry. It reproduced their sonar pulse, with variation. A change in pitch, a melody. The crew joked it was a whale, until it played the same pulse again, and again, and again, each time with slightly more complexity, until one signal came through, and the entire system shorted out. The technician would later hear that sound again, not on sonar, but in a dream. In the dream, he stood on a beach. A woman was singing, and he walked into the tide without fear. He requested a transfer the next day. He told no one, until he heard Julia. Let's go back further. In 1924, during the failed bird expedition to the Antarctic, logs mention an oral hallucination experienced by 3 members of the crew. It began with nausea, then vibration in the skull, then singing. One described it as a woman weeping underwater. Another wrote in his journal, "The sea was speaking to us, not in English, not in words, but in rhythm, and it was ancient, and it was beautiful, and it was unbearable." 2 days later, a crew member vanished. No body was ever found, only his boots, arranged in a spiral near the edge of the ice. If this were just folklore, it wouldn't appear on Black Ops radar. But it did. In 2002, during a joint NATO acoustic surveillance operation, a pattern was discovered, one that mimicked known Russian submarine routes, but which never surfaced. When the signal was triangulated, it led to a region north of Rockall, an uninhabitable islet in the North Atlantic. A drone sub was sent to investigate. It never returned. What did return was the audio, a 37-minute recording of low-frequency tones interspersed with what analysts described as organic harmonics. Whale-like, choral, but with precise modulation too perfect to be random. One technician described the pattern as a hymn. Another compared it to the harmonics found in early Christian Gregorian chants. The mission was quietly decommissioned. The audio was sealed. The file name, siren_OS, 12. And still, the tide continues to whisper. In Iceland, volunteers occasionally find spiral cairns near the coast. New stones, fresh moss, as if someone still honors the path. In New Zealand, Maori elders speak of the Tangaroahine, a sea goddess who calls her chosen children when the stars align. In Nigeria, river cults re-emerged in the late 20th century, worshipping Mami Wada, a beautiful woman with seaweed hair and eyes like mirrors, who sings you into the deep. Same symbols, same pull. One archaeologist described it best. This isn't culture-specific. It's not religious syncretism. It's subconscious convergence. Across oceans, across centuries, people keep drawing the same spirals, keep humming the same melodies, keep walking into the sea. There's one final account. Modern, documented, recorded. In 2018, a tourist in the Scottish Highlands posted a video on YouTube. It showed a rocky beach at dusk. The wind was howling. But in the background, beneath the noise, was a tone. Low, vibrating, beautiful. The camera pans across the rocks and captures a figure, standing in the water, arms out, mouth open, singing. The video went viral for a day. Then it was gone. Account deleted. IP traced to a temporary hostel. The man was never found again. Only the caption remains, archived on Reddit. She is singing. Can't you hear it? So what do we make of it? Is this real? Are people being lured into the sea by an ancient myth, a hallucination, a secret species of hyper-intelligent aquatic being? Is it mass psychosis? A global cult without a name? or a trauma buried so deep in human memory that it surfaces as music. The evidence is fragmented, but the pattern is terrifyingly consistent. Spirals, salt, songs, disappearance. No struggle, no resistance, just surrender, a gentle vanishing. A peace so absolute it terrifies us, because it hints at something we don't want to admit, that there might be something out there, not watching, not attacking, but calling. And the truly cursed ones are those who can hear it. You probably think you'd resist, you'd run, you'd fight, you wouldn't believe. But what if one day you stand by the coast and hear something? A sound you can't explain, familiar, soft, and unbearably sad, and you feel your body take a step, not out of madness, but out of recognition. Because you know, in your bones, in your blood, you've heard that song before, and you've always known how it ends. We like to think of history as linear, rational, understood, but some truths don't fade, they echo, not in books, but in blood, in bone, in tides. The story you just heard is stitched together from archaeology, forgotten folklore, declassified reports, and personal testimony. And while the institutions of power may dismiss these patterns, the people living on the edge of land and sea, they remember. They lock their doors at solstice. They burn salt spirals in fire pits. They warn their children not to hum near the shore. Because they know, the sea doesn't take you. She invites you. And if you answer, there is no coming back. If this story stirred something in you, if it left you questioning, shivering, or haunted, then subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment below. Do you believe people are still walking into the sea? And watch our next shocking story, if you dare. The ocean is vast, but memory is deeper. And maybe, just maybe, the only reason we don't walk into the sea is because we haven't heard her yet.